You have to see it for yourself.
After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to Take the Blue Pill, the PlayStation VR podcast. We'll be talking about the PlayStation virtual reality system, its games, and what they mean for you, your home, gaming, and the very nature of reality itself. Remember, there is no spoon.
Good evening, ladies and jelly babies. And in case I don't see ya, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. Welcome to the Take the Blue Pill PlayStation VR podcast. My name is Kneelsbores and I'm an alcoholic, but of course I'm not. This episode we will have our news, Rotten Meta reviews, IMHO opinion, trips and ticks, and of course Under the Hood, where I say a little bit about my philosophical and technical ideas around the PlayStation virtual reality unit. This is perhaps a little different to the podcasts you may hear from other people about the PlayStation virtual reality. I am an artist and an AI researcher, as well as a lifelong gamer. Let's get started. Before I do say anything else, I would like to say thank you. Thank you to the people that have made nice comments about the podcast, that have rated it. It's very encouraging. I'm kind of doing this podcast for myself in a strange way. I wanted a PSVR podcast that I could enjoy, and I'm excited to be doing this, but it's really great to know people are listening and people are subscribing and people are enjoying it so much. So thanks again. And let's get started with the news.
The news. Yes. The news.
This episode's news, a couple of items that I want to touch on. Sony, slightly increasing production. Only slightly. What does this mean? And why is it only slightly? We know the PSVR is very hard to get hold of. I talked about that in the last episode. But it appears that the sales are kind of what Sony expected, maybe a little heavier than they expected. So they are going to increase production, which frankly is a relief. There's a lot of people out there who want this. As I said last episode, I was really trying hard to get hold of the PSVR, and it took a lot of tricks to finally get one for myself. So if they're increasing production, hopefully you'll be able to get one by Christmas. Now, what's also interesting is that they're only slightly increasing production. Let's try and get the sales in perspective. When you consider the number of iPhones that are sold every day worldwide, and you compare that to the sales figures of the actual PlayStation itself, the PlayStation sales are a tiny, tiny fraction. So the PlayStation is kind of specialist. And on top of that, we've got the PSVR, which is a specialism within a specialism. So although it's very hard to get hold of, really the sales have not been as massive as you may be thinking if you're a big fan of the PSVR. Nevertheless, I believe, and many believe, this is an important piece of technology and equipment and experience, and has implications for the future of gaming that far outweigh the size of production run that has been done. So, bit of good news, production going up. Let's hope you can get one soon if you don't have one. And one reason you might want to do that is our second piece of news. Some people might say this isn't news, but you know, this is stuff that's news to me. And this piece of news is that Ars Technica, the website, the channel that report on technology and the arts, amongst other things, and gaming, have done a comparison of the PSVR and the Oculus Rift and the Google Cardboard, and the gear, and of course, how could we forget the Vive? And I was a little surprised when I watched their comparison. I can't afford a Vive. I pretty much can't afford a Rift. I don't have a heavy duty gaming system. Well, according to Ars Technica, they gave very good reasons why the PSVR at its price point is a damn good piece of kit and a damn good buy. In fact, the impression that comes over in their report is the PSVR might be preferable to the Oculus Rift. So, there you have it. If you have a PSVR, don't feel like second best. Yeah, they still say that the Vive is the big cheese of the bunch, but frankly, who can afford a Vive? And frankly, who has a spare room to set one up in? So, I'm very happy. I'm happy that I've got a system that someone like Ars Technica, who I respect, are really backing. And of course they say, as everyone else says, it's the most comfortable. And comfort in VR, as I will talk about in a future episode, is not just a nice to have, it is fundamental to the future of the technology. And that's the end of the news.
Rotten Meta. Now.
In this episode's Rotten Meta, we're going to review the game Eve Valkyrie. So, what can I say about Eve Valkyrie that hasn't already been said? Pretty much nothing. But I want to review it. I have things I want to say about Eve Valkyrie. Up front, just like I said about Rush of Blood, I never played Eve. I don't know very much about Eve, except what I read in the specialist press. Sounds like a fascinating game, but I don't want to touch with a barge pole because, you know, life's busy enough. I've got other games I'm trying to play. Eve Valkyrie, however, is kind of a space shooter that is in the world of Eve, but not connected to Eve. It has modes for solo play, where you're flying around in space with no other players in the game, and you can also play competitively and cooperatively. It's looking great, and I've only just scratched the surface. Like I said to you in the last episode, I'm not a great one for the philosophy of play the whole game before you review it. I want to review it while I'm in the middle of the experience. And the experience of Eve, well, it kind of breaks down into two parts, like so many PSVR games. You've got the experience as a result of it being virtual reality, and you've got the game itself. Very hard to disentangle these. Am I the person to do it? Not sure I am yet. I'm not sure we've got many experts on the PSVR. I'm very glad that there are reviewers out there who, you know, the big streamers, they get sent all the stuff. They get sent the Vive, they get sent the Oculus Rift, they get sent the PSVR, they get to try the early copies. These are the people that can probably disentangle the gameplay from the experience. But, you know, I think we also need voices that don't disentangle, because you don't experience, when you sit down and play Doom, when you sit down and play Overwatch, you don't think to yourself, well, as a pure abstract game, I only give this 3 out of 5. The only reason I like it so much is because it's got really cool characters and graphics and a smooth cartoony vibe. This is not how we experience games. We take the whole element, and if people do break down games into certain parts, I mean, I like it, it's interesting, but I think the pure experience is a valid form of review. And the experience of Eve Valkyrie, well, you know, you've heard it must be getting boring. All of the games, the top PSVR games, just a stunning experience. Eve Valkyrie is, well, I've played Elite, and Eve Valkyrie is kind of the future of Elite. To enter, well, here we go. I'm a bit lost for words here. Describing it is quite hard. Every mission starts with you in a launch bay. You can look down, you can see yourself, see your body. You know, you'll be familiar with this. If you lean from side to side, nice little touch, the body leans from side to side. You launch just like they do in Battlestar Galactica, just like they do in practically every sci-fi series. You go down the launch tunnel, speeds up, and then something happens which immediately sells the game to everyone that has that experience. You leave the launch tunnel and you go into an immersive virtual reality world. It's shocking. It takes your breath away if you've never seen it before. And you know what? Even after a number of plays, there is a sense of freedom as my small fighter ship leaves the mothership, if you like, and I can look around and see all these huge. I don't know if you've seen any videos or screenshots of Eve, the full game. A lot of them, they show off these large ships and so forth. In Eve Valkyrie on the PSVR, you have large ships galore all around you. There's some compromises. If you fly into one of the ships, you don't immediately die. In fact, you make a kind of dull thud. This doesn't, once you're actually fighting and in a mission, this doesn't destroy the immersion. It will kill you eventually. But if you're just exploring, there's hardly any time to do this in Eve. If you're just exploring, then it can kill the immersion a little bit. Highlight experiences in Eve Valkyrie are chasing around the enemy ships, looking around with your visor, going at full speed, flying through space structures, avoiding all the large objects that these space structures are made up of, looking on your radar and it's pointing to where the enemy ships are, and you swerve around to them and you try and get them in sight, and then you shoot one and it explodes. Not the world's most realistic explosion, but you fly through the explosion and you keep going and you're being attacked, and then they fire missiles at you and you trigger the anti-missile system, ECN. These are great experiences. What's not clear to me, and it's one of the disadvantages, I guess, of giving an early review, is how this will all pan out as I play the game for longer and longer. I'm really looking forward to playing the competitive mode and fighting it out with people and cooperating with people. All in all, I would actually rate Eve. It's very difficult. I rated Rush of Blood, Until Dawn Rush of Blood, a 4.5 as an experience. What's interesting is Eve has been drawing me back more. Eve Valkyrie has been drawing me back more than Rush of Blood. I feel bad doing it, but I'm going to have to give it, I don't want to give it a 5. I'm saving the 5 for that game that combines the experience of VR with the playability of something like Overwatch or Doom. I'm going to save it for that. So what can I say? I'm going to give Valkyrie maybe a 4.65. How do you like that? You got a problem with that? Tough. What I'm trying to tell you about Valkyrie, more replay value than Rush of Blood. Just as much of the experience, and perhaps a little bias. I'm a bit of a sci-fi nerd. So get Eve Valkyrie. More replayability than Rush of Blood. I do recommend it. At the price, what are you looking at? It cost me 40 quid. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Not happy about that. That's my downside, and might bump it down to 4.5. So let's give Eve the same score as Rush of Blood. Let's give it a 4.5 out of 5. And the reason I bumped it down is Rush of Blood, you're talking like £15. Eve Valkyrie, you're talking £40. I personally would have liked to see Eve Valkyrie more at the 25, 30, maybe £30. So there you go. It's a more fully realised 3D world, but will the gameplay last long enough to make Eve Valkyrie worth 65% more in currency than Rush of Blood? Give it a go. Let me know. That's the end of Rotten Meta.
IMHO. Give me your yo-yo.
In this episode's IMHO, I would like to give my opinion about a matter that's hardly being addressed, hardly being talked about. I can understand that we don't want to worry people about this. A lot of people listening to this, you're going to be a fan of VR, or you're going to be a PSVR fanboy. But we've hardly addressed the safety issues of the VR headset. The obvious one that's talked about is your room, the room that you're in, and trying to avoid crashing into things, breaking things. You know, I'm not interested in that. That's obvious. The ones that are not so obvious are, well, the effect on your eyes, and more importantly, the effect on your mind. I don't want to be like one of those Americans in the 50s, those parents saying, Americans and British, just saying if you watch TV for too long, it'll damage you, it'll lower your attention span, it'll damage your vision. It's not natural. This is not important. It's the way society works. The new generation does stuff that the old generation thinks is going to be damaging to them. That's just the way we go. That's how you get old. That's how you mature when you're young. However, we are going to be very close to the screens in VR. And speak to any scientist who spends a long time looking through an old-fashioned microscope, or anyone who spends a long time using a close-up eye system. It's very tiring. It's very tiring. That in itself doesn't bother me too much. Something that people should be aware of. But the real safety issue that needs to be investigated are the psychological ones. You know, the ratings for a movie are not to do with the sound or the screen hurting you. They're to do with the emotional impact of the content. People are quite happily generating these games with jump scares, horror games. There's a game on Kickstarter designed to represent hell in new detail, a hell type game called Agony. Looks great. I'd love to play it. However, you're going to get younger kids getting hold of these headsets. And even for maybe less stable adults. If you're listening to this and you've not used the PSVR, it's not going to make much sense what I'm saying. If you're listening to this and you have used the PSVR, just take a moment to put aside your feelings of joy and enthusiasm and imagine you're depressed. Imagine that you're not very mentally stable. Imagine that your 14-year-old, 13-year-old teenager is trying it out. And imagine a horror game, the like of, for example, the demo, The Kitchen, which we all get for free when we get our PSVR, raised to, because let's face it, The Kitchen is, if I'm using my out of 5 type score, for psychological impact, The Kitchen is probably at 2.5, maybe 3. You could ratchet that up, and you know, if you've used the PSVR, you know that you could ratchet up the horror. You know, you could double the amount of horror, the amount of fear. The just the sounds, the characterizations, the atmosphere, flashing lights, epilepsy. There are numerous potential downsides to the impact of VR. And that's not my big point. My big point is we don't know. VR, you know, when I say take the blue pill, I'm joking, of course, but that's just the representation from one of my favourite movies, 90s movies, of being in a computer reality. But the truth is, the more advanced our computer simulations get, the more they are like taking a pill. Because what does LSD do, for example? LSD changes your perception of what's around you. A sufficiently powerful virtual reality system, and the PSVR is pretty damn powerful in terms of emotional impact and immersion, will change your perception. LSD is a very dangerous drug. I'm not pro anti-drug, whatever. I'm just saying it has potential to be a very dangerous drug and is regulated. Because when you affect people's perception, you change the world around them, and both very good things and very strange and dangerous things can happen. So all I'm saying, let's have some testing. Let's actually see how far you can push people. How far should you push people with a PSVR? Because it's going to be, I know I said that the number of PlayStations sold is a fraction of the number of iPhones, but VR is expanding. Just the fact it's now available to all PlayStation 4 users is a huge change and part of the inspiration for this podcast. So let's have a little bit of research. Let's open our minds. Let's keep enthusiastic, but let's at least consider the truth of what happens when you can adjust someone's experience of reality at the levels that we're able to in their front rooms.
Trips and ticks. Ticks and trips.
In this episode's Trips and Ticks, I'm going to keep it short and sweet. This episode's little tip is a way of avoiding motion sickness. A natural reaction when, for example, I reviewed Eve Valkyrie. A natural reaction when you barrel roll, when you curve around in Eve, when you look around, you might stop breathing. You might lower your breathing rate. You're so surprised by the immersiveness and the effect, you lower your breathing rate. You also have the tendency to go into what I call a sort of perception lock. You don't want to believe what's happening around you. You're trying almost to resist seeing the movement, experiencing the immersion. Now, these are two very simple tips. Breathe. If you find yourself, when using PSVR, stopping your breathing, just start breathing. Take deep breaths. Because that's how we live. That's how we experience things in the real world. And when you find yourself wanting to disbelieve what's going on in the PSVR, if you're doing these barrel rolls in Elite, if you're bouncing around in rigs, I'm going to have to review that game at some point, and you feel yourself kind of not wanting to believe what's going on, just take a moment, relax, and accept. Just, this is going on. There's nothing wrong with thinking while you're in the game that this is going on, and open your mind to it. It's almost like a form of meditation, awareness. Become mindful of the immersed reality that you're in, and I think you'll find that with a combination of breathing and becoming mindful of the immersed reality, you will become a little less sick. I'm not saying it'll get rid of it all, and there'll be times you won't be able to follow those tips, but I think you'll find there'll be an improvement. And that's the end of this episode's Trips and Ticks.
Under the hood, you're so good.
Is the blue pill virtual? By which I mean, when we put on the PSVR headset, before we put it on, are we already in a virtual universe? Elon Musk believes so, the great entrepreneur. I saw an article in the UK newspapers about this, and it was actually written by a journalist I respect very much, and she was she was reporting what other people were saying. She wasn't kind of giving a strong opinion either way. But what the other people were saying, I disagree with. They were saying it is overwhelmingly likely that we're already living in a simulation. So when you pick up your PSVR headset, it's a simulated headset. And you're then, when you're in the PSVR virtual reality, you are actually, according to these theories, you're in a virtual world within a virtual world. Well, their argument, which I think is codswallop, is given the length of time, the likelihood that advanced societies will have existed, the likelihood that such advanced societies will have created virtual worlds, the likelihood that their computing power will have grown to the point where they can create numbers of virtual worlds that we can't even conceive, trillions and trillions within their computers. Well, there's only one reality that we know, and yet in these posited virtual worlds that these advanced societies are meant to be creating, there are trillions upon trillions, almost vastly uncountable numbers. So the chances are we're not in the one real reality, because if there's only one real reality and trillions of virtual realities, well, we're trillions and trillions of times more likely to be in the virtual one. This is the argument. Unfortunately, it is a spurious argument. I can understand why people want to argue this thing. One of the things is, when you're a professional scientist or technologist, a lot of these people, I think they're very creative, and in some ways, I think they're kind of frustrated storytellers. They all want to tell a story, and the only way you can tell a story, if you're a professional scientist or technologist, is to kind of say it's true. The idea that something you think is a really cool story could be true pushes you to find evidence that it is true. So a lot of these people, I think the underlying coolness of the idea is driving them towards it. But let's talk probabilities then. Let's talk probabilities. We have a perception of what we call reality based on our five senses. What's the probability that's the right perception? If our species, and species like ours, could exist for another 10 trillion years, which, why not? Surely in that time we will develop an entirely new perspective on the nature of reality, which may be nothing to do with the way we view reality or the senses now. Why? And isn't it funny, just as we invent affordable virtual reality, we start talking about the fact we could be in a virtual reality. Within, 20 years, less than 15, 16 years of the film The Matrix that popularised this stuff and embedded it into the consciousness of the current generation, we're talking about, maybe we live in a virtual reality. It's like pre-Kepler, when everyone said the Earth was at the centre of the universe. We've invented virtual reality, so virtual reality now is at the centre of the universe. Before the theory of evolution, humans had some kind of special place in biological reality. Theory of evolution, that all changed. So I like the idea we're living in a virtual reality, but just because it's a really big, weird idea, and just because it's really cool, let's step back a moment and ask ourselves, isn't it a bit of a coincidence that we're starting to say this now? Isn't it a bit of a coincidence that right now in our history we've discovered the nature of what a real reality is, and so therefore we can talk about virtual realities? We don't know very much at all. So talking about the nature of reality right now seems a little premature. Well, ladies and jelly babies, thus ends another episode of take the blue pill, and I will bid you farewell. Have a great time till we meet again in the next episode. And remember, there is no blue.